And in order to have this type of equality, we need to talk about finance and greater financial equity. So we turn now to climate finance, which is gaining momentum. A groundbreaking activity in the private sector is reflecting several macro trends, such as a shifting of investor attitudes, a growing divestment movement, an increasing shareholder activism, and the awakening of financial regulators to climate risk. There is a clear international mandate for climate finance based on the Paris Agreement as well as on the SDGs. Climate risk is a non-diversifiable financial risk. Then we can infer that climate action is a financial opportunity. Sustainable finance and the role of CFOs is fundamental, as finance is a key pillar of climate action. The UN Global Compact's CFO Taskforce brings together a network of 60 chief financial officers, as well as other participants from the finance and investment industry, to implement the SDGs across corporate finance strategy and practices. I also want to draw your attention to the side stage 1 to learn how to promote climate, health, and equity in business. This panel will explore the link among climate, health, and equity and illuminate opportunities to identify and prioritize climate actions that can provide the greatest near-term ROI, driving savings from reduced mortality and the economic and social growth associated with a world that is truly healthy, equitable, and sustainable. But before we get into both of those exciting sessions, let's hear from Jose Manuel Entresanales, the chairman and CEO of Acciona, for special remarks.
2021 has been marked by one most significant event in the world, which has been the pandemic. It started in 2020, but I guess we're seeing the solution to it. The coming out of this global catastrophe, we're seeing it in 2021 and on ongoing years. The 4 elements that mark the solution of the pandemic have been science, regulation, finance, and metrics. The climatic challenge, I think, can be dealt with in the same way. The science element in the climatic emergency is absolutely undisputable nowadays. We have no doubt there are plenty of reports confirming the anthropogenic nature of climate change, and there is the technology. As for finance is there also. There is plenty financial capacity, both from the public and from the private side. So we've got science, we've got metrics, and we've got finance. Now, what is the other key element that has contributed to solve the pandemic? Regulation. It is unheard of, having confined the global population to a great extent in our homes. That's something that is possibly one of the most impressive regulatory steps that the world has taken in its history. Now, I'm not saying that is what's necessary, but the capacity of regulation to make things change is enormous. So from Glasgow, I would expect the regulatory side to be a very strong outcome of this summit. How do we account for NDCs, the Article 6, accountability? All these elements need to be very clearly regulated, and that's where we expect that I would expect to come out from Glasgow, because civil society is mostly there. As we were saying, finance is there, capacity is there, technology is there. I think the most important piece that needs to be resolved nowadays is the regulatory side. So that would be my hope for this summit. Thanks very much.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're delighted to be hosting this session as part of COP26. My name is MORICE. I head Sustainable Finance at the UN Global Compact. There is a clear international mandate for climate finance pursuant to the Paris Agreement for both governments and business leaders to take action now. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently asked that coalitions of public and private finance institutions unite to scale up existing financial mechanisms to fund a just transition towards universal access to renewable energy. Investors' attitudes are shifting, financial regulators are integrating climate risks, and the role of CFOs, chief financial officers, is becoming increasingly essential. 2 years ago, the UN Global Compact launched the CFO Taskforce for the SDGs, which brings together leading CFOs as well as leaders from the finance and investment industry to implement the SDGs across finance strategy and practices. This global movement of CFOs is growing, and we will be launching our Global CFO Coalition on December 13th, which we hope you'll be able to join. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our two co-chairs, Mr. Alberto de Paoli, CFO at NL, and Mr. Scott Matter, CIO US PIMCO. Thank you both, and over to you.
Thank you, Marie. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor for me to join you in this event of leveraging the power of CFO to unlock climate finance. And so to focus on the key role that the corporate investments are taking in this difficult fight against the climate challenge and also to reach the SDG targets for 2030. We all know that we are so gathering to try to do things to fight the climate change, that this is something that is not only action on this, is to rethink and redesign all the economies we lived and experienced in the past, all the technologies, all the business models. That's the very, very challenge and also so exciting things that we have in front of us. I think that the very point is showing how a sustainable choice is not only ethical and social positive, but is a business choice that can create companies that will be in the future more profitable, more long-lasting. So it's also an economical choice. And I think here the CFOs are relevant to earmark this aspect and to show everyone that is the right choice as a business perspective. And that's why we are here, that's why we gather, and we started working 20 months ago under the Global Compact umbrella to have this specific role to define strategies centered in sustainability and to earmark investments into sustainability and SDG targets, and to report how it's good to make this kind of choice as a business model. That's why after 20 months, we have created a framework, and then we took our action on this. And now we have set a first important target that the companies within the CFO task force are set to invest more than 500 billion euros for the SDG enrichment in the next 5 years, and to reach 50% of our finance the earmarked into the sustainable finance. These are concrete numbers that are related to the fact that we think that doing this, we can also show how it's good invest in issuing sustainable financial instruments. And through this way, we can gather thousands of other CFOs of companies that will join us in this effort. We at Enel Group, we are already doing this. And so we have already set 200 billion euros in the next 10 years, more than 90% focused on SDG enrichment. And we have already 50% of our sustainable finance on the overall finance, and we are set to reach 70–80% in the next 10 years. And this is something that now we are sharing with all the companies involved, and we want to share with all the companies that will want to join us. So at the end of this my speech, let me say that I'm reiterating the call for all the CFOs everywhere that want to join us in this effort, so to work together to move the economic and financial levers to save this world, and also to redesign and redefine the business history of this century. Thank you very much. And now let me give the floor to my colleague and friend, Scott. Scott, the floor is yours.
Greetings, colleagues and friends. It's my pleasure to join Alberto in welcoming you to this virtual UN Global Compact event taking place amid the current COP26 climate conference. During COP26 in Glasgow, the topic of climate finance has been a priority agenda item, with both public and private sector leaders stressing the importance of directing and scaling investments in ways that align with the Paris Agreement, the net zero agenda, and many, many new commitments have been made, both in the run-up to the conference, during this conference, and will likely follow in the months ahead. Indeed, the lead up to COP26, it was the UN Secretary General just several weeks ago that urged the many climate coalitions, public and private, to unite to scale existing financial mechanisms and advance innovative investment solutions in order to finance a just transition toward a low-carbon future. There is no doubt business and investment leaders in the private sector have a critical role to play. And more specifically, corporate investment and finance and the active involvement of chief financial officers around the world will be essential. Public sector funding alone cannot meet the climate crisis and the SD challenge alone. Just 20 months ago, the United Nations Global Compact launched a very innovative initiative, the CFO Taskforce, really focusing on involvement of chief financial officers and building investments at scale. The rationale for creating the initiative was clear and compelling. With some exceptions, chief financial officers have been a missing link with respect to the sustainability movement, despite the fact that they're custodians of over $15 trillion a year in annual corporate investment. The effort recognized that the CFOs will be a driving force in helping to achieve the Paris goals and the SDGs. During the recent UN General Assembly, the group announced plans to go global, with the aim of recruiting between 500 and 1,000 CFOs within the next 5 years, leveraging the UN Global Compact network of over 14,000 companies worldwide. So creating a global movement at such scale could really unlock trillions in investment annually, a complete game changer. Colleagues, the CFOs in our task force are pioneers, no doubt about it, and they understand that we shouldn't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And they shouldn't shy away from innovation and experimentation. We need to show courage and boldness in the face of these daunting challenges and opportunities. And this is our call to action. We hope many more of you will join us. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Alberto and Scott, for your opening remarks. $500 billion already committed and 1,000 companies joining the CFO task force by 2023. This, I think, gives us a good sense of the ambition and powerful impact that the task force can have in achieving a net zero future and driving the integration of SDG 13, climate action, in corporate investments and finance. So we've invited a group of leaders to share their insights with a particular focus on emerging and developing countries, as they are rapidly growing and hence highly attractive to investors, whilst also being on the front line of climate change challenges. It is my pleasure to welcome on stage Lila Karbassi, Executive Board Chair SBTI and Chief of Programs UN Global Compact, Ami Yadazimi, CEO LADL, Kushik Chatterjee, CFO Tata Steel, and NELWIN ALDRIANSYAH, CFO Pertamina Geothermal Energy. And of course, the fantastic Maggie Lake, who will be moderating this panel today. Thank you, and over to you, Maggie.
Thanks so much, Marie. It is fantastic to see the progress that the task force has made to date. We are going to continue the conversation about how to leverage the power of the CFOs to unlock climate finance. And welcome to our panelists. Thank you all for being with us today. Lila, I'd like to start with you. Corporate climate action is central, of course, to the Global Compact's mission of driving change, particularly through the science-based target initiative that was set up. Can you bring us up to date on the standards the initiative recently released and also the analysis of the decarbonization efforts in G20 countries?
Thank you, Maggie, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And I want to congratulate the work that all the CFOs are doing in this task force. It's remarkable, and I want to recognize the efforts to also bring this work to scale and build a coalition of thousands of CFOs that will follow your footsteps. The Science-Based Target Initiative has released a new net zero standard just last week. It's the world's first framework to assess corporate target setting in line with climate science. There are lots of commitments out there around net zero, and what that framework does is to assess whether those commitments are indeed aligned with the Paris Agreement and align with science to reach the 1.5 degree target. So we're thrilled to have that. We're oversubscribed in terms of the number of companies that want to have their targets validated through that standard. 700 have already requested to have their targets reviewed through the lens of this standard. We've announced 7 companies that have pioneered and were part of the piloting of the standard itself, and they have their targets already validated in terms of what net zero constitutes by 2050. So we are very excited to continue to build that momentum. And surely the CFOs that are part of the task force and all of the CFOs out there have an enormous role to play, and the stakes are really high for this COP26 conference. Just very briefly on the G20 countries and the results there, the companies in the G20 countries represent 80% of the emissions, and we're monitoring very closely their engagement in the climate action, and we have done some analysis to show that none of the G20 countries are actually on the path today to reach 1.5 degree. So much more needs to happen, and we rely on the capital that all of the CFOs are able to allocate in the right way so that we fully decarbonize our economy by 2050.
Yeah, Lila, it really underscores the urgency around this conversation for all the good news, to hear that there's the oversubscription to get on board, to be validated, and then we hear that we're just not where we need to be. Amy, your company is in a remarkable position to help support this energy transition that's so needed, while still at the same time, I think we all acknowledge it's so important to continue to make sure there's access to energy in countries like Nigeria and on the broader African continent. What do we need to think about, though, in terms of social impact, jobs, to make sure that this transition works for everyone?
Oh, thank you very much for having me. So Ladol is an industrial free zone, one of several special economic zones in Nigeria. The idea of free zones is to create local jobs. So you get a lot of incentives, and on the one hand from the government, but on the other hand, you've got to create jobs. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. If you think about the demographic dividend that is coming to the African continent as a blessing, what that means is we have the potential to drive economic growth and prosperity across the world through employing and empowering Africans across the continent. In order to do that, we need to embrace the concept of global energy transition, meaning those of us from commodity-dependent countries like Nigeria need to leverage those commodities to sustainably industrialize and over an agreed period of time, wean ourselves off the use of those carbon-based fuel sources. In Ladol, we have a plan to achieve net zero by 2035 by building a circular economy. And so here's the great thing about high growth, low income countries like Nigeria, you can actually build new worlds. We can create new paradigms where you can have a plan today that is based on all the new technologies and embracing all those new technologies over using a master plan to ensure that when you do industrialize, you do it correctly and you create hundreds of millions of jobs in the process. However, in order to do that, we're going to need a lot of money. And so we have to look at how is funding going into transitioning and sustainable private companies across Africa to make sure that we industrialize sustainably.
Yeah, I think it's so important. The way you framed it from the very beginning is leaning into the opportunity that's present. What do you think we need to hear from investor relation departments of companies in terms of how they communicate around the physical and transition climate risks, the way that the risks are presented to investors, the risks and also the opportunity and value in doing it? Well, what would you like to hear from investor relation departments?
Thank you. So I think that the catchphrase net zero is useful in that it's a catchphrase that, is very easy to spread. But how can we change this into a paradigm that people can use to raise money? And that's all about the definitions of bankability. So we need to see people working in investor relations, liaising with organizations like the UNDP, UN Global Compact, talking about reporting standards and making clear analogies between those reporting standards and bankability so that you can then draw a line that says, okay, if I invest money in companies in Africa that meet these sustainable criteria as set by, UNDP or whoever, I know that those companies are likely to yield a higher return because we know that ESG is associated with higher return. What that does is broaden the definition of bankability, enable more money to go to sustainable companies, and create a global standard for sustainability that will enhance returns that are coming to investors right now who aren't getting those returns all the time because they aren't always investing in sustainable companies.
This is a great point, Amy, and this is why I think it's so important to have the CFOs, the financial teams of companies sort of embedded and carrying out the sustainability strategies through companies, because this is the vocabulary around that needs to happen in order to release that capital. Kushik, I know the issue of capital has got to be near and dear to your heart when we're looking at this. I mean, Tata Steel is ranked among the top 5 steel companies in the world when it comes to corporate sustainability. But there are challenges. The sector is very capital intensive, and a shift to more eco-friendly production is going to require huge investments, not only investments in material, but technology. What are your company's plans for your CapEx investments, and also in setting climate-related R&D budgets?
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you for having me in this panel. You're right. I think steel is one of the most hard to abate sectors amongst many of them which exist. And so we are in two parts. We are in Europe and in India. In Europe, it's a clear direction to decarbonize, to meet the EU Fit for 55 conditions, and invest in low carbon technologies we've already announced that we would move towards natural gas-based steel making, and then eventually to hydrogen when it's more commercially viable to do so. And I think that's the way forward. It's a multi-year program. The European funds, including the funds in Netherlands, like the SDE++ schemes, etc., provide certain opportunities. And I think we are going to work on a shared basis. It's a shared risk for the company, the government, and stakeholders and customers. And that's how it's going to work around, both from a policy point of view, target funding point of view, as well as from the internal generation. So I think that route is pretty clear. As far as India is concerned, we're in a situation where over the next couple of decades, India is going to grow very significantly. Its entire policy framework is focused on ensuring social equality, issues like ensuring that the people of the country actually are able to prosper, and we are targeting towards a very significant level of economic growth. And in that path, there are challenges as to how do you do it sustainably. So while one can handle the inequality question, one has to also look at both climate and biodiversity and other issues of resources of water, labor, and various other elements of the SDG framework. So our focus is on investing in new technologies, ensuring that we transit in an efficient manner to be one of the best in the world as far as steel is concerned from an emission point of view. And we have started doing that. But we are certainly pricing carbon internally. So for all our capital allocation projects, we have a carbon pricing. India doesn't have a local carbon pricing, so we benchmark with the EU ETS, and we recalibrate at intervals to ensure that the carbon does get impacted in capital allocation and now into OPEX decisions also. So this is, it's not just investing, it's also being efficient on your legacy assets. You cannot impair or write them off or shut off the tap. So you have to transit out in an efficient manner. And investment in technologies, operating technology is important. We have started a program of corporate venturing, which is the InnoVenture program, as we call it, which is innovation and venturing. And we are looking at putting a very strong filter mechanism for early stage investments into ideas which are focused on clean technology, and which helps us, and it helps to build scale on the entrepreneurs with whom we are partnering. So there are multiple ways. So we are growing organically. We want to do that in an efficient manner, focusing on ensuring that we benchmark with the best and beyond that. In Europe, we are looking at the clear transition on a decarbonization pathway. And therefore, it is important for us to take it in a holistic manner and ensure that capital, whether it is internal capital or external capital, it comes in a manner which is focused on decarbonization. So we certainly don't want to deindustrialize, we want to decarbonize and do it efficiently for all stakeholders.
It's so interesting. It sounds like, I just want to ask you a little bit more. Are you kind of creating an innovation hub and a sort of seed, early stage seed investment arm within your company? And is that new for Tato, or is that an extension of what you've been doing, but now it's focused on these sort of climate focused SMEs?
Yeah, so I think we did not have it 10 years back or 5 years back. So we started this, we realized that the traditional way of investing in CapEx and technology, and our R&D was focused on in their own labs and focused on ensuring that they do what they have been allocated resources for. And then we said that this is not about just us. It is how do we collaborate and work in a coalition with a larger ecosystem, and we need to build an ecosystem. So our technologists are going out and talking to others and ensuring that if there is an idea on, say, on a low carbon fuel, or whether it is in a process technology or in product technology, how do you make your supply chain more greener? And because it is not just us, it's scope 1, 2, and 3. So how do you actually get the entire ecosystem then focused on? And all of them are saying, where's the money? So we said, okay, fine, we'll create the corpus within our capital allocation system and provide that money to ensure that they can go to second stage, the third stage, where it becomes more bankable, and then they can attract more investors, and we actually play the role of facilitators. And if it makes sense for us, then we will also continue to participate in the tiered funding to make them bigger. So, and there are huge opportunities we are seeing in India, in Europe, and especially in these areas. And I think this is an exciting way. So it's not just the risk, but it's also the risk and opportunities. And clearly there are opportunities to scale up. I think that's
absolutely. I think that's so exciting, and it's really borrowing from a model that we've seen work so well and be so successful in the world of technology, now expanded into this space, which I think is so exciting. NELWIN, I can see you nodding along to much of what's being discussed by our other panelists. Pertamina also, I know, very focused on this, eyeing issuing green bonds to fund renewable energy investments in Indonesia by 2022, particularly for your geothermal development. Bring us up to date on what's happening there and really the correlation between your climate-aligned funding and your capacity to decarbonize.
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you for having me at this prestigious event. Aside from Pertamina's plan to issue green bonds in 2022, we at Pertamina Geothermal Energy is also planning to issue our own green bonds issuance in the first half of next year. We are currently in the process of appointing professional parties, including SPO provider, who will provide our ESG framework. The green bonds proceeds will be used to refinance our existing conventional loans and also to finance our CapEx plan in developing new geothermal projects in Indonesia. These initiatives will increase our installed capacity from the current 672 megawatts by an additional 375 megawatts in the next 4 years. We're aiming to have a total installed capacity to 1,500 megawatts by 2030. This additional capacity, I believe, will contribute significantly to our parent company, Pertamina Persero, to decarbonize their assets and reducing the emission by 30% by 2030. At our current capacity, we are currently reduced the emission by about 3.5 million tons CO2 per annum. And with this additional capacity, we expect to reduce the emission further to 6 million tons by the next 4 years, and to 12 million tons by year 2030. And the government of Indonesia also aims to improve its energy mix from renewable energy sources from the current 12% to 23% by 2025. I believe this provides an ample room for renewable energy companies like Pertamina Geothermal Energy to expand its installed capacity and provide higher contribution to emission reduction. Our expansion plan would help Indonesia to achieve net zero emission target by 2060. With this, I believe our financing plans to support our capacity growth in the future, which includes issuance of green bonds next year, will contribute significantly to Pertamina objective to decarbonize its asset portfolio. And it is also aligned with government of Indonesia commitment to Paris Agreement and SDGs 13 on climate action.
That's wonderful. What has the reception been like from investors? Do you sense a change happening in the investment community?
Yes. Honestly, Indonesia, there's not much green or ESG bonds coming out from the market. Yeah, we've seen a few issuance last year and this year, but we've been approached by many investment bankers and investors to help us assisting this debut green bonds issuance for us. And based on the information or pitching documents from those bankers, we would expect a tighter pricing for green bonds issuance as compared to conventional bonds in recent years. Yeah.
I would just like to get some final thoughts from all of you. And Lila, if I could circle back to you, why do you think, and again, the point that some of the work that's being done has been oversubscribed, it's fantastic to see the response from corporations. Why do you think the Science-Based Target Initiative and the standards released and the reports are so important? Why is it so important to have that framework right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. The real reason is because the standard provides a very robust science-based understanding of net zero. It gives full clarity and confidence that near-term and long-term decarbonization plans are in place and that they're compatible with what is required under the Paris Agreement, and that they help ensure that we have a planet that we can live on for the next couple of years and for the next generations to come. And without that sort of validation, it's very hard to make sense of all the announcements out there in terms of is the decarbonization plan enough? Is it going fast enough? So what that standard does is that it tells you within the next 5 to 10 years, you need to halve your emissions by 2030, and within the next decades, by 2050, you need to reduce your emissions by 90 to 95%. And it also gives you lots of clarity around the scope of the reduction in terms of how your customers are using your products and the influence that you have on the share of CO2 going in the atmosphere from that sort of practice. It brings a lot of clarity around things that are a bit more technical on, what do you do beyond your value chain? What do you do in terms of offsetting? What do you do in terms of removals? And those practices cannot be accounted for the purposes of decarbonization. It's decarbonization first, and yes, lots of other opportunities to invest in nature, but these, come as an additional, set of actions. So yeah. We're very proud to be part of the Science-Based Targets initiative, and very encouraged by the response by the business community, the finance community, to have that robust scrutiny of the net zero commitments.
I have learned something from talking to so many CEOs about this, and I know that a favorite saying of theirs is that if you can measure it, you can manage it, and I'm sure that that is going to go a long way toward helping on that front. Amy, when you spoke earlier about all of the opportunity and the ability to create a new paradigm, you also said very frankly, we need money. Well, what is your message to the investment community when it comes to looking at sustainable finance in emerging market countries or toward the African continent?
Thank you. So I think it's critically important that we get investment dollars going in the right direction. We have an opportunity to invest in $12 trillion of new sustainable businesses. We have an opportunity to sustainably industrialize an entire continent for the first time. And it would take actually a relatively small amount of investment. So if you're looking at the business case, if you're making evidence-based decisions, you're going to recognize that your money needs to go in the same direction that we need to go in order to save the planet. And that's the wonderful thing about sustainability. And the strongest message I can leave for investors out there is that the results are in, the studies have been done, the evidence is unequivocal. Sustainability equals profitability. So look at how you can expand your definitions of bankability and invest in sustainable entrepreneurial companies, large companies, small companies across the African continent today.
And Kushik, last word from you. I think it's so important, especially coming from a sort of traditional steel background. You know, we talked about all the innovation technology that's there, but there is a transition. What do investors need to understand about financing the transition?
Great question, Maggie. I think the financing world is just now shying away from looking at funding the transition costs because everybody wants to start with a clean slate. But if you have legacy assets which needs to transit into a low carbon world, there will be a transition cost. And I think that needs to be factored in because what is happening is, in many ways, the cost of capital, especially for developing countries, continue to be high because of the factoring in various risk premiums. And there could be a table of risk premiums which is being added. And therefore, it is defeating the very purpose of transiting into a low-cost, low-carbon economy. I think the other point is tenure, because these transitions are longer in terms of number of years. And therefore, financing has to be more patient than looking at a traditional bank financing, 5-7 years, and so on. So I think both from a tenure point of view, cost of capital point of view, looking at transition cost as an element of the overall project or investment will be very critical to make this transition more affordable and more sustainable and more profitable for all stakeholders. Otherwise, we will be just debating about concepts and not being able to put actually money on the table and ensuring that these investments do happen. And with Glasgow, I think the world is completely aligned that time is running out. So, and this transition will take time. We may announce our net zero targets, but if we don't have financing, and that is affordable and that is meaningfully helpful, we will miss those target dates. And I think that's something we must all look at. The investors are getting more aligned to it. They understand it. They are actually, in my view, in a bit of a dilemma because they are wondering whether the return of the portfolio that they have will go down if they take this path. And they just need to cross that hump in terms of their mental mindset and looking at the model which is more sustainable. And as Amy rightly said, more sustainability is more profitability. To just want to make it more financially viable to make it happen.
Absolutely, and we certainly hope they heed those wise words. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for the fantastic conversation and insight. For more information on the CFO Task Force, please head over to www.cfotaskforce.org. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We just heard how important finance is to achieving the goals of climate change. And I would add that if we want sustainable solutions and innovation and entrepreneurs to help us, we need to invest in the women of the world.